Hello and welcome to Ag PhD. I'm Brian Hefty.
And I'm Darren Hefty. Thanks for joining us today. You know, one of the things that comes along with farming is sometimes you get some bad weather. And one of the results of bad weather is lodging, or even in corn, greensnap. We're going to talk about that today.
We're also going to discuss bin fan controls, especially in a year like this year where a lot of people are holding on to grain from last year, like we are on our farm. You want to have bin fan controls to constantly monitor that grain in your bin. We'll talk about that today.
One other thing that sticks around from year to year, Brian, is our weed of the week. We'll show you how to stop this tough weed later in the show. But first, here's our farm basics.
Stop losing money from your stored grain with the EndZone fan control system from Farm Shop MFG. The EndZone monitors outside conditions to run your fans so your grain naturally reaches ideal temperature and humidity. For more information, visit farmshopmfg.com.
During our Farm Basics time today, we're going to talk a little about riparian areas. Now, what these are is basically just buffers near waterways or lakes, and the reason why we have those there as farmers is to help protect the water and keep that water clean.
When you think about what are we really protecting the water from? Well, you may right away think, oh boy, farmers are using fertilizers, for example, and pesticides out in their fields. They want to keep that out of the water. Absolutely, of course we want to keep that out of the water. Those things cost a lot of money on the farm, and we want them to serve their purpose in the field. We certainly don't want them to get away either. We don't want to cause any harm with those things.
Well, the other thing about it here is the soil. A lot of times there is going to be some wash. I mean, think about where our rivers, where are lakes, where are streams? They're at low points. Well, if they're at low points, that means that things are going to run down the hill to get to them. So when water is running down the hill, it oftentimes can carry, like Darren said, pesticides or maybe fertilizer, but it can really carry soil, and that's my focus here. If we have those riparian areas, that keeps the soil out of the stream, keeps it in my field, and I don't lose my valuable soil downstream.
Now, there are a lot of misunderstandings when it comes to water and water quality, Brian, and a lot of things, I hear it on TV, I read about it in newspapers. Oh, it's farms that are to blame for dirty-looking, muddy water in rivers, and it's sad. It really makes me a little bit angry. But when you look at rivers and think about how they actually work, rivers move all the time and they're eating into the banks at every bend. And what are they doing as they eat into the banks? They're pulling soil into that river. The river eventually fills and the channel continues to move. Now, as farmers, we can't do a whole lot about that, but we can control the soil that's very valuable to us, that we make our living off of in our fields, and keep it in our fields. And that's one of the reasons riparian areas are so important.
Yeah, and with the riparian area, just to finish this up here, part of the purpose of that riparian area is to secure the soil. Like Darren said, the river certainly is going to continue eating soil out all the way along the river. That's just the way it goes. You're never going to stop that unless you literally cement the entire river, which no one's going to do. So in lieu of that, if we can have some trees, some shrubs, even some grass, that helps hold that soil in place. It takes much longer for the river to eat out that bank, and it helps preserve our fields right next to any river, lake, or stream.
Riparian areas are very important to farmers, and so is weed control. We'll talk about controlling this tough weed later in the show.
Each year brings new and unique challenges to farming, and your operation needs to constantly adapt to meet them. That's why at Ag Biome, we're working every day to bring you new and better solutions. Microbial-based solutions that protect your crop and help it reach its full potential. To learn more about how we're doing it, visit agbiome.com. Ag Biome, feeding the world responsibly, partnering with microbes for human benefit.
If you want unparalleled performance from your cornhead, you need the DIAMANT from Capello USA. Fully hydraulic deck plates chop with speed and precision, and chain-free gearboxes make a quieter, more efficient machine. The DIAMANT's revolutionary quick-release snouts and bonnets prevent damage and make maintenance a breeze. And it folds, allowing clear visibility on roads, making travel between fields safe, quick, and easy. For more ways the DIAMANT can innovate your corn harvest, contact your Capello dealer today. Capello, wherever you are, we are.
Downtime during spraying can lead to huge yield losses. Keep rolling with the Pentair Hypro Force Field. This pump features a unique self-regulated chamber that allows the pump to run dry while eliminating cracked seals, so you can spray longer and more reliably. Learn more at pentair.com/hypro.
Success isn't just about maintaining your operation, how you make out for the season, or how much you can get from each acre. It's about doing precisely what needs to be done to feed your crop and grow your legacy, all the way down to the last drop. AgroLiquid Precision Crop Nutrition. Apply less, expect more. Find a retailer at agroliquid.com.
Stop losing money from your stored grain with the EndZone fan control system from Farm Shop MFG. Hot spots and moisture in your bin can cost you thousands in lost revenue. The EndZone monitors outside conditions to run your fans exactly when you want them to, naturally bringing your grain to ideal temperature and humidity. Master bin management with the EndZone. For more information, visit farmshopmfg.com.
In 2019, in our region of the country, we saw some of the worst greensnap and lodging issues in corn we'd ever seen. We believed a lot of that had to do with the late planting, the tremendous growth that we were getting and just at the wrong time, a huge wind ended up coming through, flattening a lot of stuff. Well, unfortunately, we've seen just a little bit of that here again in 2020. We want to talk today about what greensnap and lodging really is and how you can prevent these things from causing major yield losses on your farm.
When you think about how a corn plant grows, each day it's capturing sunlight, it's pulling in water and nutrients through the root system, and it just keeps getting taller and taller. And we oftentimes think about knee-high corn and how quickly it gets to shoulder-high or taller than us corn. It happens very, very fast. So that plant is accumulating so much material so quickly. Well, what happens is by the time we get to the middle of the night, that plant has brought all these things in and it's ready to start hardening off cells of new growth. And it takes a little bit of time for all that to happen. So we need that evening time to be not so windy because the plant is full of water and not hard yet on those new cells. So by 8, 9, 10 o'clock in the morning, those cells have started to harden off and the plant is pretty secure to take on the wind of the day. When you get storms that come over the middle of the night, that's oftentimes where we see this greensnap because we've got cells that just haven't had a chance to harden off yet.
So with greensnap, it's where the plant actually breaks off. Just lodging isn't necessarily so bad. Lodging is when the plant tips over to some degree. With greensnap and lodging, probably the biggest thing I'm always talking to farmers about is having adequate fertility. Potassium by far and away is #1 in the plant for stalk strength. Beyond that, it's manganese and it's copper. So if you're seeing consistent lodging and greensnap issues, look at your levels of potassium. We'd like those around 4 to 8%, something like that. On our farm, quite frankly, we're shooting now for 7% base saturation K. Also, you have to have adequate parts per million. If you have sand, you could have 7% base saturation K and very low parts per million. So keep your parts per million up and your base saturation K up. With manganese, we'd like to see those levels 20 to 40, at least on a Midwest Labs DTPA test. Malic 3, we'd like much higher than that. And then finally with copper, we're probably shooting for 3 parts per million. So with those 3 nutrients, those are the real keys. Make sure that you've got those in high amounts in your soil. If you don't, you're just much more prone to both lodging and greensnap.
Well, I like the focus on fertility because really a lot of it comes down to fertility. With corn hybrids, they're always going to have a period of susceptibility to greensnap or lodging. Oftentimes it starts at about V9 and goes up through tassel, but some hybrids it may be 1 or 2 growth stages, others it may be even broader than that. It may start at V7 and we see something very early in the season. So hybrids are an easy target because oftentimes as farmers we see, well, this hybrid lodged worse than this one, or this hybrid had more greensnap than this one. It's important to look at more farms than just your own, because chances are you're not the only person that planted that hybrid. You could drive 5 miles away and see, oh, well, when that hybrid was 2 leaf stages ahead, we had no problem with the same storm, or when the rows were facing north and south instead of east and west, or vice versa, we may have had no issues. So before you start blaming the hybrid, just know every hybrid is susceptible to lodging and greensnap. Some do have a little wider window than others.
The other thing that I would say is planting population is huge. As you lower planting population, you're just going to see less greensnap and lodging. And part of that comes back to fertility. If each plant has more area of the soil it can now pull nutrients from, well, obviously it's going to pull more nutrients in. So you got to think a little bit about what your planting population is, what your overall risk is for greensnap and lodging, and what you have for soil fertility. So let me put it to you this way. If you have low soil fertility, don't be bumping your planting population just because you're hearing seed corn companies say, well, the best farmers are getting really high yields at 36,000 population. Look, if you've got 2% base saturation K, you can't plant 36,000 population. Maybe 26,000 population would be much, much more appropriate. You got to take a look at what every factor is out there and weigh these things out. And sure, sometimes you're going to luck out. Sometimes the wind doesn't come, everything's fine. But what we're talking about most of the time is trying to protect ourselves here as farmers from loss in some of these really tough years. And it might only be 1 out of 5, 1 out of 10, but we got to take a look at this and say, all right, what can I do to reduce my susceptibility to these high winds, to greensnap, and to lodging?
Last thing I would say is greensnap is an insurable event. So if greensnap in your area is very common, or if you're planting some risky hybrids on a regular basis, take the insurance out. It may be well worth the money for you. Talk to your insurance agent to find out the details.
Well, greensnap and lodging, unfortunately, can be a real problem on the farm. Another thing that can be a real problem is our weed of the week. Can you identify this week's weed?
If you're looking to expand your farm's grain handling, you want everything to be fast and efficient. The Quick Belt from Norwood Sales is your all-around grain handling solution. Our conveyor-based system uses an 18-inch belt and a 10-inch tube, which minimizes seed damage while moving more than 10,000 bushels an hour. That's fast enough to fill a semi in 6 minutes. Plus, our hood is designed to gently direct the flow of grain straight down, keeping your crop in condition. Keep your grain and your farm moving with the Quick Belt from Norwood Sales.
Find love, and then give it all away. Find love, then give it all away.
Where we have run the Soil Warrior, we have harvested the best corn we have ever harvested in the history of Wrenwood Farms. Now, I'm kind of always wanting to push the envelope to see what else I can do to help enhance that emergence. Their ride is so much smoother. Their seed placement is even better. Where we had our best emergence and we've had our best yields was where we ran the Soil Warrior.
Why do I farm? It's just something I've always wanted to do. Something I've known since I was my daughter's age. When you farm, you have a responsibility to keep it growing. To look at a freshly planted field, a newborn calf, even your bottom line, then ask yourself, how do I help this grow? How can I make it even more productive? I ask myself these questions every day because no matter what I'm doing, I'm still a farmer.
How much does your crop residue cost you? Over time, residue accumulates in your fields, building excess carbon levels and tying up your plant available nitrogen. Residue also traps P, K, and micros and can take years to naturally become available to your crops. This is because soil lacks the diverse microbial life needed to break it all down. With DECOMP, you can naturally restore life to your soil and allow the release of valuable crop fertility. Learn more about DECOMP at eggbio.solutions.
Today we're going to talk a little about bin fan controls, and the reason why this gets to be a big issue in the fall is really it comes down to a couple of things. Harvesting grain that's too wet or too dry. On the too wet side, obviously you've got to have low moisture grain if you're going to store it for a long period of time, which is very common on the farm. On the too dry side of things, what I think about most often is soybeans. It's very common for soybeans to get down to 10% moisture, 8% moisture. That's bad. What that means is we've lost moisture that we could in effect sell to grain elevators. If your moisture percentage goes down, then that's what they call shrink, and now you have a lot less dollars you're going to sell to that grain elevator. So can you put moisture back in? Well, you can't go spray water back on grain. That's illegal. But what you can do with bin fan controls is pump more humidity into the grain and have it slowly go up over time in moisture so you get it at the appropriate moisture level. Well, to do any of these things, dry the grain down or wet the grain back up, it's very hard to do manually. So what we talk about all the time here on the show is using bin fan controls to do these things for you.
You know, just like every other technology, bin fan controls are something that, okay, at one point there were controls to check your moisture and try to make adjustments in your bin, and they were really expensive and they were clunky and they didn't work well and nobody wanted to do it. I think about it just like computers. You may say, well, I want that super fast computer, but you know what? It's just out of my budget. I'm not going to do it. That's how bin fan controls used to be, or bin controls used to be, or bin monitors used to be. They aren't like that anymore. They're much more inexpensive. And even for small farmers that say, well, I've only got one bin, or well, this is only a part-time thing for me. I'm farming and I also have an off-farm job and I'm not there all the time to monitor or even try to do this. It may be more valuable to you if you're in that situation. I look at bin fan controls as something really valuable for a big farmer and also for a small farmer. You just have to learn a little bit more about what they can do for you.
So more than anything, we want you to think a little about dollars and cents. Start this with dollars and cents. So I'll give you the example of 13% moisture beans versus 8% moisture beans. That's a 5% moisture loss. But for shrinking soybeans, what we figure is 1.5% per point. So if you take 5 times 1.5, that's a 7.5% grain loss. So when you haul in 8% moisture beans, you're going to haul in 7.5% fewer beans than if you would have hauled them in at 13%. Well, what's 7.5% worth to you? If, let's say, you've got a bin full of soybeans that's worth $100,000, 7.5% is $7,500 in 1 year. And I just want you to think back on your farming career. How many times have you ended up with 8% moisture beans, 9%, 10%? You know, as farmers, we react to all these docks that we get at the grain elevator. When you haul grain in and you have some kind of dock there, some kind of moisture discount, some kind of charge, you go, oh, I don't want that. I want to make sure I don't have that in the future. But what we don't think about are these hidden losses. When you're hauling in 8% moisture beans, what I'm telling you is if you haul in $100,000 worth of beans, you just lost $7,500. And yep, doesn't show up in your paycheck, doesn't show up on that scale ticket or anything else, but you lost $7,500. It's a lot of money, and for a lot less than that, you can certainly equip a bin and then monitor that grain moisture as you go so this doesn't happen to you again.
The thing I like, Brian, is harvest timing. And when we think about corn or we think about soybeans or really any crop, if we can harvest at that ideal moisture, that's fantastic. Maybe we're going to haul it right to town. Maybe we're going to haul it to town a week later after we've had time to put it in the bin and condition that grain just how we want it to be. But having bin fan controls allows us to get going a little bit earlier. Because you mentioned how many times have we had 8% moisture beans? How many times have we had 8, 9, 10% moisture beans on the same day as we're harvesting 13%, and it was just a few hours apart because there was a sunny day with warm temperatures and a hot wind? So this allows you to time that harvest a little bit different and to get going, to harvest for more hours during the fall, which is valuable to everyone.
There are a lot of different companies out there that do sell bin fan controls. One that we've been talking about quite a bit here over the last few years has been Farm Shop MFG. We'd encourage you to check out their website, do a little more research on this, and we believe you will find you need to control those fans on grain bins on your farm just like we do.
Well, bin fan controls are great for handling your grain, but they won't stop our Weed of the Week. We'll show you how to get this weed under control coming up next.
The Weed of the Week is brought to you by Corteva Agriscience, Agriculture Division of Dow DuPont. Finish the fight against tough weeds with the Enlist Weed Control System.
Weeds are tough, but we're tougher. With unrivaled weed control, reduced drift, and near zero volatility. So, who's tough now?
Our Weed of the Week is a biennial. It's musk thistle.
Well, we were talking about control methods here today, Brian, and I got thinking about back when we were kids. Sometimes Dad got too busy on other things, and all of a sudden a musk thistle actually put a head on and started to make some seed. And I remember one time Dad said, get out there with a corn knife, cut those things off, throw them in a garbage bag, and let's burn them. We don't want those things going to seed in the pasture. Well, that was the one time that ever happened. After that, once I knew, we've got to get these things under control early. If I saw a musk thistle, it was time to go.
Okay, so here's the thing. With these biennial plants, they're going to look a little bit different quite often from year 1 to year 2. In year 1, they're going to be in what's called the rosette stage, so they'll stay lower to the ground. Their whole purpose for year 1 is simply to get built up and ready to go to survive that winter to go into year 2. Now, in year 2, it's called the bolt stage, and then the plant will grow tall. It will put flowers on, then seeds, and go to seed at some point later that year. Now, what Darren was talking about here is when you start to see that head on the musk thistle plant, a lot of people say, oh, I'll just cut it before it goes to seed. Well, you don't know if the seed is viable yet or not. And we talk about this all the time with weeds in general. Don't ever let them even put a head on so you don't have that risk that, some of those seeds there might be viable already. And our dad was very concerned about weed control. I mean, we are the Weed of the Week guys. So growing up,
we just haven't been the Weed of the Week guys on this show. We were the Weed of the Week guys before that.
Right. So it was just impressed upon us from the time we were little kids that we have to control weeds if we want to maximize production of anything, whether it's crops or pasture grass. And we see these musk thistles out in pastures all the time, but there are good methods to control them besides going out and cutting them off with a machete.
Well, the other thing that I'd mention too is understanding the growth stage is so important. That rosette stage is really critical. If you can get them in that first year of growth, they're much easier to control and you don't have to worry about them going to seed at all. The other thing is, if you're out in cultivated row crop fields, we just don't see musk thistles, and here's why. They're a 2-year life cycle weed. There's no way it's going to survive out in a cultivated field.
If you're cultivating, if you're tilling. So if you're no-till or maybe strip-till, maybe you do see some musk thistle out there. The good news is we've got great methods for control. If I'm out in a cornfield, I'm going to probably recommend Status. That's my first choice. Almost any dicamba will stop musk thistle, though.
You can also, in soybeans, choose Extend soybeans. That would allow you that dicamba option.
Or Enlist.
Or Enlist soybeans, which would allow you a 2,4-D option. So that would be good ways to control that in soybeans.
So you think about that in pastures, yes, you can use dicamba. Distinct is great. It's basically Status without the corn safener for 1/3 the price. You also have 2,4-D. Now, personally, I prefer Milestone. That's the very best option. Tordon is really good as well.
That's all the time we have for this week's Weed, but Iron Talk is coming up next.
Each year brings new and unique challenges to farming, and your operation needs to constantly adapt to meet them. That's why at Ag Biome, we're working every day to bring you new and better solutions. Microbial-based solutions that protect your crop and help it reach its full potential. To learn more about how we're doing it, visit agbiome.com. Ag Biome, feeding the world responsibly, partnering with microbes for human benefit.
If you want unparalleled performance from your cornhead, you need the DIAMANT from Capello USA. Fully hydraulic deck plates chop with speed and precision, and chain-free gearboxes make a quieter, more efficient machine. The DIAMANT's revolutionary quick-release snouts and bonnets prevent damage and make maintenance a breeze. And it folds, allowing clear visibility on roads, making travel between fields safe, quick, and easy. For more ways the DIAMANT can innovate your corn harvest, contact your Capello dealer today. Capello, wherever you are, we are.
How much money are you leaving in the bin? If you want the most profit from your stored grain, you need the Grain Temp Guard from Farm Shop MFG. This low-cost bin monitoring solution tracks temperature and humidity and gets your grain in ideal condition. And with deep preseason discounts on all Grain Temp Guard units, now is the best time to upgrade. Don't leave your money out in the bin. Get the most from your grain. Order today at farmshopmfg.com.
More choices, more money. With Bayer Plus Rewards, you choose from our broad portfolio of high-performance products. Earn more money on the eligible products that are right for your farm. And use our new portal to see your purchases, track your rewards, and decide how you want to use them. Visit mybayerplus.com to sign in and start earning. That's the advantage of more control in your hands. That's the plus.
Success isn't just about maintaining your operation, how you make out for the season, or how much you can get from each acre. It's about doing precisely what needs to be done to feed your crop and grow your legacy, all the way down to the last drop. AgroLiquid Precision Crop Nutrition. Apply less, expect more. Find a retailer at agroliquid.com.
Iron Talk is brought to you by Case IH.
Why do I farm? It's just something I've always wanted to do. Something I've known since I was my daughter's age. When you farm, you have a responsibility to keep it growing. To look at a freshly planted field, a newborn calf, even your bottom line, then ask yourself, how do I help this grow? How can I make it even more productive? I ask myself these questions every day because no matter what I'm doing, I'm still a farmer.
Growing up on a farm, Dad made it very clear safety would always be the most important thing on the farm. At harvest time, though, it was sure easy to get caught up on how quickly we were trying to get things done. In today's Iron Talk, we'll discuss one of the biggest safety issues at harvest and how you can avoid it. Combine fires happen every year. The danger and risk is always there, even with the many safety features and design upgrades to newer combines. Whenever there are multiple fuel sources for fire, like a combination of diesel fuel, oil, dry stalks, chaff, and a heat source, you've got some risk. Today we'll give you some tips on preventing a combine fire on your farm. Your biggest risk area is around the engine. Most fires will start there, and for good reason. That's where much of the heat is generated and where chaff and debris tend to settle. Part of the reason chaff builds up around the engines is due to the presence of grease, oil, and fuel that have either leaked out or have been spilled. It's wet, sticky, and together with dry chaff and crop residues is almost the perfect residue for fire. Preventing problems begins with a thorough cleaning. A hot water pressure wash will remove grease and oil buildup. If there are no new leaks or spills of oil, grease, or fuel, a daily blowdown with your air compressor could be sufficient to decrease your risk of combine fires. Especially during corn harvest, finding the time to do some daily cleaning is pretty tough. Just 15 minutes a day, though, is well worth your time. Plus, climbing around on your combine on a daily basis is also a good idea, just to look for any potential problems or upcoming maintenance items. So don't be a statistic this harvest season. Start with a hot water pressure wash around the engine and anywhere else that grease, oil, or fuel buildup may be on your equipment. Then, use compressed air on a daily basis to clear away the chaff and other crop debris. Taking just a few extra minutes a day could keep you and your family safe from a combine fire. That's all for today's Iron Talk, and now back to the show.
That's all the time we have for today's show. But before we go, we want to invite you to check out the Ag PhD radio show. You'll find us on SiriusXM channel 147 at 2 p.m. Central each weekday.
And don't miss the next Ag PhD TV show. We'll have another Weed of the Week, Farm Basics, Iron Talk, and a whole lot more. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for watching Ag PhD.